what makes a gaming mouse or keyboard actually good? Like, what exactly should you be looking for, both in terms of specs and what to pay attention to in reviews? Well, by the end of this video, I hope that you'll know exactly that, so let's dive straight in, starting with the simpler of the two, keyboards. Keyboards, generally anyway, are often considered less important for raw gaming performance. Yet are one of the two things you actually interact with on a daily basis, and that feel can affect your experience pretty dramatically. A truly bad keyboard can significantly hamper your gaming experience, for sure, but the difference between an average and an excellent keyboard for gaming is, at least for me anyway, harder to discern compared to an average versus excellent mouse. Still, how the keyboard feels and sounds is by far the most important aspect for your actual user experience. Obviously, without being able to try it yourself locally, your only port of call there is reviews. And we do tend to harp on about how it feels and sounds. A good thock is generally preferred, although the switch type can also have a pretty big impact on your experience. A red style switch is linear, meaning there is no tactile feedback, it's just a straight slide. Some people prefer that, especially for gaming, although for me, I struggle to enjoy them. Brown style switches though have a silent tactile bump into them. Those are my favourites, and blue style switches are the ASBO option. Those are clicky. They're often a very high-pitched and grating click to them. If you can't tell, I can't stand them anymore. I actually used to love my Razer Black Widow 2013, it's just tucked back here. That's the pre-patent lift Cherry MX Blues, and I enjoyed that when I was 16. Now I'm 28 and everything hurts, so a refined tactile bump is best. There are actually some technical tests that, with the right equipment that I'm working on building by the way, you can run to tell you a whole lot about the how good a keyboard will be for both typing and gaming, regardless of how good it feels. Just to give you the concept of what could go wrong here, you could have the best feeling keyboard in the world, like the perfect thock to it, tactile or not, whatever you prefer, but when you actually press a key, it takes 5 full seconds for your system to recognize that you've pressed that key. That'd be a problem, right? Well, let me run you through the sorts of things that you want to see tested. The first is all about the switch travel and actuation point. Standard full height switches tend to have around 4mm of travel, and due to how springs work, the switch tends to have a non-linear force to push it down. As in, it actually gets harder to push the further you push it in. You can map that pressure over distance, and while you're at it, you can also map the actuation and release points. Oh yeah, did you know that mechanical switches, like the press and release points, are at different heights? That's kind of wild, right? Working out where in the travel the switch actuates is also pretty important. If it's right at the top, that can be good for gaming, but can also make it horribly sensitive to the point where you can't type on it without a whole bunch of typos, or in games that might manifest itself as a whole load of bad inputs that can spell the early end of your game. Of course, with this new crop of analog magnetic Hall effect keyboards, you can adjust their actuation points, and for those boards, it's even more important to test them, because while they can be wildly off from their set heights. The SteelSeries Apex Pro Gen 3 that I reviewed a while ago had horribly inconsistent heights. Set it to 0.1mm and it takes over 1mm to actually actuate. The actual range, that's a lot of actuals, it could manage was compressed. So even the stock 1.8mm was actually 2.2mm or something like that. Obviously it's not the end of the world, the keys do still work, but it would be nice if what you set the height to and what it actually was were the same thing. One other feature you've likely heard of, especially recently, is polling rate. USB peripherals like these work by periodically sending packets of data to your system that, in your keyboard's case, is what keys you've pressed. The polling rate is how many times it does that per second. Most keyboards send 1,000 packets per second, or 1,000 hertz, although newer keyboards offer 4,000 or even 8,000 packets per second, or hertz. There is one very important thing to note though, which is that at least on keyboards, there's actually a second polling rate, the internal polling rate known as the key scan rate. That is how fast the microcontroller inside your keyboard checks to see what keys have been pressed. On 1000 Hz keyboards, the key scan rate is usually 1000 Hz as well. But on the newer, higher polling rate boards, it's kind of a mess. Some do match, but many don't. Corsair tends to have a lower key scan rate than the polling rate. For example, the K70 RGB Pro TKL Hall effect board that I reviewed a little while ago now, that can do 8000 Hz polling, only scans the keys at 4000 Hz. So for all intents and purposes, it is an 8000 Hz keyboard. The reason you might want a higher polling rate on a keyboard is really down to the latency, which happens to be the biggest thing for keyboards. That's how long it takes from you pressing a key to your system recognizing that input. That's the most critical metric for gaming, and happily I already have a tool to test that with. The open source latency testing tool, available at osrtt.com, linked in the description below if you want one. With my newest CS model, you basically just stick a bit of aluminium tape on a keycap and then use a banana plug to tap that key. Tap it enough times to get a representative sample, and then you've got your answer. Good keyboards only take a handful of milliseconds to respond. The Newfie Air 60 HE8K is the fastest that I've tested so far, at just 4.6 milliseconds, although really anything up to 10 milliseconds, depending on how much travel you have, isn't too bad. Anything higher than 10 milliseconds or so on average, and I would call that poor performance. There are some other things that you might want to consider, namely additional features. That might be as basic as RGB lighting you like, extra knobs for volume control, I do love a good knob, or extra keys for macros. But that might also be more game-changing features like hot swappable key switches, so you can truly customize the feel of your board and repair it later. Or like the analog features like multiple inputs per keystroke or rapid tap, sort of instant resetting to get lightning fast movement in games. That sort of thing can have a pretty significant impact on your usage or gaming experiences, so keep an eye out for those that you think are actually going to be useful to you and your playstyle. As for mice, well, at least for gaming, these are really where it's at in terms of your in-game performance. The mouse needs to be an extension of your arm in order to work right, not just a thing you're holding. The biggest factors in that happening, at least on the physical fronts, are the shape and the weight. Your ideal shape will depend on how you like to grip it. There are a few main styles. Palm gripping is just like plonking your hand on top, really smothering the poor thing. You almost certainly palm grip something like a Logitech MX Master, and importantly, you tend to actuate the left and right clicks with like your whole fingers. There's also claw gripping, which is very similar to palm, but instead of your fingers lying on the switches, they rise up to sort of claw them, and you actuate the left and right clicks with the tips of your fingers instead. There's also fingertip, which, much like it sounds, means that your only points of contact are your fingertips. The various shapes generally work better for different grips, although because palm and claw grip are very similar, the same shapes generally do a good job for those, but fingertip generally prefers smaller shells. Also, your hand size will affect things quite a lot, although people like Artings do an amazing job at telling you what size hands fit what mice. The weight, on the other hand, is pretty universal. The lighter the mouse, the quicker you can flick it around, and the more accurately you can do that too, and the less fatigue you'll have on your wrist from doing it. For certain genres of games, FPS games mostly, this is extremely important. This is a very key thing to be looking for, although for other genres it may be less of a big deal. Still, less weight means less momentum, so it's more easy to be accurate when you click on something, be that an icon or a head. Something that might surprise you for me to say is that DPI, or CPI depending on your preference, doesn't matter. Mice nowadays are coming with 20,000 or 26,000 dots per inch, or counts per inch, but who cares? You're not going to use the mouse at anything more than, 1600 DPI? I generally use it at 400, so the max DPI doesn't really matter. What does are the other sensor measurements like IPS and acceleration. IPS is inches per second. That's how far you can move the mouse per second and have it still track. A low number here is worse, like that Amazon special thing that was hot garbage at 20 inches per second, down from 650 on a good gaming mouse. As for acceleration, that's how fast you can move it and have it still track. That's another sort of higher is better affair, with a good mouse these days being 50 Gs plus. Actually, one subtle thing you can look for is the light source for the optical sensor. If it's infrared and built in, then it's likely pretty good. If it's a plain red LED, run. Of course, mice also have a polling rate, and that's arguably more important than a keyboard's polling rate, because a mouse doesn't just send what button you've pressed, it sends your cursor position too. And that updating more frequently can mean smoother input matching for a better experience and better accuracy. It isn't necessarily the biggest game changer, but the more data, the better in this case. That does mean that latency can be improved, although in my testing there isn't actually that much difference between running at 1, 4 and 8K. With that said, all of the fastest mice that I've tested have, in fact, been high polling rate mice, with the fastest mice taking less than 2 milliseconds end to end to report. With a good result being basically anything under 5 milliseconds, anything more than that and it's kind of stretching it. One thing that can actually have a big effect on the mouse's latency are the switches. The sort of best kind are optical, with Razer's style being a beam splitting or beam breaking design, and the close second being Endgame Gear's SPDT style switch, which uses the fact that mice switches actually have two different sets of contacts for when they're open and when they're closed. So you can use the removal from the closed contact for click and removal from the open pad for release, giving instant action with no debounce delay. Pretty great, right? There are also extra features that mice can have. Wireless and wireless charging, extra buttons, hell, even extra scroll wheels and ergonomic design if you go down that route, although your options are generally more limited there. One thing that's prevalent for both mice and keyboards though is the software to tweak things. Most softwares seem to either be bloatware or outright spyware, I'll let you make your own accusations in the comments down below, or are web only. Web only does make sense, but can be a little annoying to work with sometimes, and often are very under-assisted on the UI front. At least the bloatwares have tooltips and instructions. Most of the time, you're kind of just doing a sort of set and forget type thing with these sorts of peripherals, so it isn't a big deal that it's a little difficult to navigate at first. Although I found with older games in particular, you will need to use their especially mouse configurator to change the polling rate back to 1000 Hz to avoid stuttering, so do keep that in mind. Of course, there is plenty more that we could talk about when it comes to mice and keyboards and how to test them, but I think that what you've heard so far are the key bits that you need to know to make an informed decision about your next gaming peripheral. As always, check out reviews from trusted sources, and generally the more testing they do, the better. I've mentioned Artings here as a great example, as their testing methodologies are always spot on. Or for a more hands-on experience, folk like Rocket Jump Ninja generally have your back there. Of course, if you want to be able to test your own peripherals, especially for latency, you are more than welcome to pick up an open source latency testing tool at osrt.com, linked in the description. I build them right here at home in the UK and ship them worldwide. And I'm also working on a peripheral testing tool to do a lot of the tests that I've mentioned in this video for both mice and keyboards. So do, stay up to date. If you're interested in that, on osrt.com there's a newsletter box. Feel free to drop your email in there. You will never get an email from me until I've launched a new product, so feel free to do that if you want to stay updated. Also, if you're sort of interested in mice and keyboards in general, or you have any questions, feel free to leave those in the comments down below. If you want to check out more videos like this one, including what makes a good gaming monitor, check that out on the end cards and hit the subscribe button to see more videos like this one. And otherwise, that's kind of it. Hope you enjoyed the video, hope you found it useful. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.